pretty wild, pretty out there, would be pretty extreme. But when it comes to your portfolio to cities, our cities aren't working the best for us when it comes to the way they're configured, the way traffic goes in and out, the way public transport works. So what are you taking out of this report for your portfolio?
Well, the first and most important point is that cities really matter, and the way they work, regional as well as the outer suburbs and the CBDs themselves, they really matter for productivity, which most importantly, read productivity as wages, incomes, welfare, how much money we're making and taking home every day. That's why it's important. It's not important because economists like it. It's important because it affects our incomes. And of course, what the report says is that the way our cities work really matter. Now, every day we see it in practice. Too much congestion. It's been increasing in recent years. We've seen that planning has been extremely restrictive, and we haven't had enough houses built in the fastest growing areas. And of course, where we've built them, we haven't always supported them with the services and infrastructure we need. Now, they make all those points, which I completely agree with, and that's why we're making significant changes in the way we invest in infrastructure, in investing more through financing, not just grant funding, which was a feature of a significant feature of the last budget, increasing the capability of the federal government to shape those investments in ways that we never have before.
But when it comes to infrastructure, for example, New South Wales, the New South Wales government is investing heavily in huge new infrastructure projects there. But this is state jurisdiction. Yes, some of it is funded by the federal government. But what can you do?
Well, we do fund a lot. And we were involved.
But it's encouraging that private investment, isn't it?
Well, look, we can absolutely do that. And we've set up a team, very small, high calibre team. I prefer small, high calibre teams to get results within the Prime Minister's department to focus on attracting more private finance into infrastructure. It's a 50% increase in investment in infrastructure in the last budget, $75 billion investment plan. That increase is largely financing. It's actually bringing the private sector into investing in infrastructure. We can do a lot more of that.
When you bring the private sector in, doesn't it mean tolls?
No, not at all. I mean, that's one way of doing it. Of course, that's one way of doing it. But with public transport, for instance, we already have revenue models, whether there's fares or increases in the land values around train stations. These are not. These are well-established sources of revenue. We just don't use them to finance. And most importantly, what we don't use them to do is invest in the infrastructure at the beginning of the growth phase rather than the end. And we all hear horror stories, particularly in the outer suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne, of situations where governments have allowed growth to happen, sprawling sort of growth to happen, and the infrastructure investment happens 20 years too late. That's happening in Western Sydney, and we're playing catch-up with Badgerys Creek Airport, the massive road investment package, the work we're doing on public transport there. And the federal government plays a role. We don't want to be an automatic teller machine for the states, which to a large degree is where the federal government has been. We haven't shaped these investments, and the Productivity Commission is rightly saying we should be involved in shaping them as a partner, not as the lead player in many cases, but as a participant.
Do you see a real problem coming in the next 5, 10, 20 years? I mean, we're constantly seeing reports in New South Wales, for example, that, you know, something like 200 new childcare centres need to be built every week to meet demand in 2030. More schools need to be built. You have a huge population growth in the outer Sydney area where the jobs are still in the CBD. I know that Malcolm Turnbull has a vision, a plan, a dream, whatever you want to call it, to have people going to work and not having to spend more than half an hour doing so. Is that a pipe dream?
No, I don't think it's a pipe dream at all. It's not going to happen overnight. But the fundamental problem is we've got these regional centres where you live close to where you work, but there's a challenge with not enough jobs, so we've got to continue to drive jobs growth in those regional centres, and we've been focusing on that in places like Townsville and Launceston in recent times. But in our major capitals, we've got people living on one side of the city and working on the other, and nowhere is that clearer than Sydney, where we've got massive distances from what have become, unfortunately, dormitory suburbs over to job centres in the eastern side of Sydney, and the solution to that the Greater Sydney Commission's put forward, that I wholeheartedly endorse, is to think of Sydney as three cities, to think of a west, Parramatta-based city and the east.
This is what Lucy Temple has done.
And look, this is good thinking, because that way we can get to a 30-minute city. You will not get to a 30-minute city, which is a city where...
When are we going to get to this 30-minute city?
Well, we'll get there when we have three cities. That is the simple...
And when's that?
Message. Well, the key is get Badgerys Creek up. Labor is... we're hearing backbenchers objecting to Badgerys Creek proceeding. We've got to make it happen. It's been on the books for too long. Now, the good news is we are headed in... the first work will start in the next 12 months, so that's fantastic. We've got to get that to happen, continue the massive infrastructure investments and build a genuine city in the